Trying Umbraco for the first time and got some questions about how the back office works? I've got a video for you. Hello everyone, so we find ourselves in the Umbraco back office today, and again there's no code going on today. This is more of a just kind of a understand what options you have from a graphic user interface here with Umbraco. So the first things you'll notice here is it's very fancy. It looks nice. On the left hand side here we call these sections. If you mouse over, you'll see we have a content section, a media section, settings, developer, users, members, and sometimes forms. On the right hand side here you will have some tabs. These are called dashboards in this particular context. So we have a redirect URL management dashboard, we have a get started one. You can create your own custom one as well. And it's a little chicken or the egg here. So when you install a Umbraco instance locally, you won't have any content here. When you right click and try to create, there won't be anything here. So I've gone ahead and cheated a little bit and added some document types, which is what you then select on this screen here, just to give us something to work with. We're going to cover other sections like the settings, developer, etc. in subsequent videos, but for now I've gone ahead and just added a couple things here. So today is just about the content section. So the content section is where you're going to spend most of your time, or at least your editor is going to spend most of your time. And this is basically where you want to input data. So as you can see here, we have a page called Our Page. When you click on that there, it will take you to the piece of content. Within that content, you have two tabs. These are not sections anymore. These are just regular old tabs. In the context of a piece of content, a tab is just a grouping of data types or property editors. There's a few names for those, and that's just fancy words for ways to input content into your install here. If we click on the Properties tab here, this is generic information about the piece of content. One very useful thing would be a link to that content. So if you want to see what it looks like, you click that there. Each piece of content has a ID. We have basically the author, when it was created, when it was last edited, the document type, and we'll talk about that more in the settings section. And we have ways to schedule publishing, schedule unpublishing, and then if you want, you can have one or more templates available for your piece of content, and that's selectable right there. More orientation here, we have the preview button here. If you click this here, it'll preview the content without actually persisting it, but it'll give you an idea what it looks like. We have save and publish as your default action here, and if you hit the little triangle here, or caret I guess is what it's called, you'll hit the save button if you want to save but not publish, and if you want to take the piece of content totally out of view from the public, you can hit unpublish and that won't delete anything. And if we look up here, we have a bunch of context menu items: create, delete. I won't repeat all of them here. You can see them here. We're going to go through each one, but just to give you an idea, you have a context menu there. That context menu is also available if you right click over here. So there's more than one ways to do that. So content is where it's at. And so if we want to create a piece of content, there's a few ways to do it. You can right click on this content section here and select create. This will create something at the root level of the website. So if we create a generic page, and then new in Umbraco 7.7 is the idea of content templates. We're just going to start with a blank one here. And we can call this my page, whatever we want to call it. We can add all kinds of cool stuff here. And these are configured property types, which we won't talk about today. And we can throw some default content in there for now. And we'll hit save and publish, and it will remember all of our information here. And now we've created my page. Now, if we go into here, the name of the content derives the URL. It's very important. So if we were to create a child page under this, well, first off, it's going to say you don't have any configured. But if you did, your child page underneath here would be my page / whatever you name it. And that's important to know because all the content here is a hierarchy. So if you have let's say a news landing page and you have news items, you'll put that as a child underneath those there. So in general, that is how your content will live here and how it drives the URL. We also have the recycle bin here, and if you were to delete something, and it would move it down here into the recycle bin, which you could do a restore if you wanted to. And if you click this right here, it'll warn you that, hey, I'm going to restore this under the root. Is that okay? And so that's an option you've got there. So let's do a rundown of all these context menu items. So we saw what create does, and that's, again, create a piece of content. What shows up in this list here is highly driven by what is available in a different section, and that's going to be your settings. So we'll look at that time. But for now, it usually presents you with what is possible to be created. So right at the root, we can create these different doc types. And right now, we've restricted that, no, you cannot create any children under here. Otherwise, they would show up there. Next, we've got delete, and that one's pretty obvious. What happens there when you hit delete, it will move it to the recycle bin. Next, we have create content template. And what that is let's say you've created a piece of content and you like the values that were entered in there. And we want to be able to use this as a template maybe moving forward for our content. Not your output template like you would render for HTML, but this is just your data template, so to speak. So we can call this whatever we want. If I hit create here, and then right click here again and go back to create. Oops, let's go right there and hit create. And let's create a generic page. There's template 1. And so essentially what happens is it starts with that content at the time of the snapshot. You can manage that later in a different section, but for now, that's what that does in the context menu here. Moving things. So when you have a tree of things, what you can do is you can move something underneath another one. That only applies if that content type that the document is valid to go under that one. So we'll cover doc types more in detail later. Moving down the list here, we can copy a piece of content, and if we hit copy, it will basically just clone that particular piece of content right to wherever you specify, because you can, again, kind of use like a move operation here, and you can put that elsewhere. If we keep moving along here, we have change document type. This is a little tricky at first, but basically if something started maybe as a generic page and now it needs to be of a different kind of page that is configured, and this is a doc type again, then right here is where you can try to convert those from one to the other. Sometimes you have mixed results on that. Do some research on that if you need to do that particular operation. Next, we've got sorting. Notice here that we have our page followed by the other pieces of content, and if we want to sort those items here, what we can do, if I go up here, we can drag and drop and it will reorder. So if we want our page now to be at the bottom, there it is. So the reason that that's important is because sometimes when you're rendering out content like a list or something like that, you'll want to render it in the order that it appears in the content tree. Not always, but it's something that you can do. Moving along here, we've got the rollback feature. So if we click on the rollback feature here, we can see that our Umbraco keeps track of all the diffs or all the differences between old versions and new versions, what changed. And as you can see, that's there's a ton of changes here. That's kind of an unrealistic example, but you got your green and your red kind of giving you an idea what's happening. If you hit rollback, it will roll back that piece of content to that version. It's useful if you make a mistake or somebody accidentally does something that you didn't want to. So that's the rollback feature. The audit trail feature here is very useful if you want to see what's gone on with a piece of content. And as you can see, it captured the fact that I just rolled back. Moving down the list here, we've got the publish feature. So if you hit publish, You've got a little more options here than you would if you just hit the save and publish over here. And in fact, you can publish this page and all of its subpages. So think of this as this current page plus all my children. And then you have an additional option here if any of the children were not published, it would do so. So think of that as kind of one way to do a bulk publish. We have culture and host name. So a lot of times you don't even need to mess with this, but in other times you will actually need to be able to set, let's say, your domain name, and you want it to be based on a certain particular culture. Now, I've only got English US configured at the moment, and in order to expand this to other languages, we would have to visit a different section, but maybe for another time. The other big use here for this would be to, if you had a multi-tenant site, let's say this was the entry for site 1 and this was the entry for site 2, then you would have to let Umbraco know that this domain goes here and that domain routes there. So it's a host name-based routing scheme as well. All right, moving on here, we've got permissions. So permissions is a really deep topic, and just know that you can restrict or give access based on different things here. So something for you to play with. If we keep going here, we have public access. Now, this is an interesting feature yet. Again, it's another one of those deep features. Let's say you need some content to live behind a username and a password. This is where you would visit here to register for that. And of course, it's warning us here that we need to create some member information, and member stuff's in a different section. But for now, just know that if you need to lock down some things, you do that with public access. Notifications, this here, if you would like someone to know when one of these actions is performed, you can set that up. Send a translation, not something I've used maybe ever, but you can configure translators, which there are none right now. You can kind of set up a workflow for translation. And then finally, it says, because it's a tree-based thing, you can refresh a tree. Sometimes it gets out of sync. One last thing I want to kind of briefly talk about here is this right here. If you right-click at the very top, you've got an extra feature here. It's called Republish Entire Site. And when you click this, it kind of gives you the feeling when you hear Republish Entire Site that it's going to publish the entire site. What it's really doing is it's updating the website cache. And this is usually step one to use that feature. If you start having content issues or whatnot, you'll want to just bump the cache in that way. So anyway, that is your quick overview of content, and next up is the media section.